off this countdown, at number 10 we have possession. We were just talking about it. So I don't know which idiot would even do this, but never ask a demon to possess you. What?
But people actually do that. People do ask a demon to possess them.
Spirits just love possessing humans anyway, so the fact that some idiot would be dumb enough to actually invite them to do so is like a free pass. They will do it and you will lose your free will, as a spirit will literally live in you as you. You don't even know what entity you're dealing with on the other side. You could literally be asking Beelzebub to possess you and you'd have no one to blame but yourself.
I mean, in my opinion, it's pretty obvious to not ask the board about possession or for a spirit to possess you, but you'd be surprised about the number of people that actually ask these questions. Seriously, you think it's cool to start foaming at your mouth and have blood pouring out from your eyes as you start crawling on all fours? Nah, you are getting sent straight to an asylum where you will spend your life locked away.
I just don't like when they crawl on all fours. How do you do that with your, how do you do that? That's actually
their spine is like in half.
Oh,
like,
no.
I don't know how spirits do that.
Coming in at number 9 is illness. I don't know why I said it with a smile, but we're gonna go with it. Now, when you're communicating with spirits in the afterlife, a very common question anyone would want to ask is about their own health. I mean, they're ghosts. Surely they know more than we do. I mean, that's the least I expect. Now, you're there using the board hoping to find out if you're getting sick, if you're already sick, if someone you love is sick, or so on. And I get it. Why wouldn't you want to know in advance so you could prevent it? But multiple paranormal experts alike claim you shouldn't ask Ouija board questions regarding disease, illness, treatment, or anything like that, and they have good reason to think so. For one, the entity you could be talking to could have died in like 1864, meaning they have zero knowledge of modern healthcare practices and could probably misdiagnose you and tell you have like the bubonic plague when you really just have bronchitis. Secondly, the answer could stress you out and not even be true, and the stress would then weaken your immune system and get you sick, aka the whole thing would turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy. All in all, don't do it, lads. At number 8 we have the future, and believe me, we know how tempting it would be to ask a Ouija entity about your future. Like, I want to know so many things. When will I get married? To who? What will life be like? Will Trump ever get impeached? Etc. But you shouldn't do it. Things change all the time. The future isn't set in stone, so what could the entity even tell you? I mean, that honestly really depends on what you believe. Muslims believe that your life is pre-written, so there's a course your life is meant to follow, whereas others believe it's constantly changing.
And spirits may not have all the answers that we're looking for. I mean, I don't think they have harnessed the power of time travel. As a result, whatever answers you get from them, probably made up. Maybe they say something extremely terrifying, like that we all die from a big pandemic.
That's too close to home, Lindsay.
Sorry.
It's too soon to make those jokes.
Knowing this information would probably scare the crap out of you and drive you insane. Not only this, but maybe you will contact a demon that purposely wants to mess with your head. And so they will say some messed up things about the future just to scare you.
Like, I'm already battling with so many already internal demons, I don't need any more. You know what I mean? Goodbye.
Making our way down the list at number 7, we have the cause of death. When using a Ouija board, you are communicating with a once living soul. If you begin prying into their personal life, it may upset them, especially if you start asking questions about how they died. I think it's safe to say that they probably don't enjoy being dead, and so they will probably be very uncomfortable if you start asking them about it. Keep in mind, you're the living one and they aren't. They are jealous that you are still alive and that they are no longer. If you keep asking them questions about death, then they may become upset, and that's the last thing you want to do, make a spirit angry. How would you feel if you suffered a tragic death and next thing you know, a little 16-year-old named Brittany is fooling around with the board making jokes about your death? I know that would piss me off. And who knows what kind of abilities they have. Anger them enough and they could make you pay. This is exactly what happened to a group of friends. Apparently they summoned a spirit with the board and started asking intimate questions about their death. Next thing you know, the spirit knocked over a candle and that caught a bunch of paper towels on fire and half of the kids' living room got burnt down. So, just saying. Okay, now at number 6 are jokes. Now this one made me laugh before I even started talking about it, honestly, and I know I didn't do it, but in my head I did. Now look, I totally get it. You're sitting there, barbecue sauce on your titties, and you think to yourself, now I could wipe this sauce off, or I could just play with a Ouija board. You go with the latter, your friends are all over, barbecue sauce on their titties as well, and the one class clown in your group is feeling rather funny and thinks it's smart to start the session off with a joke. First of all, RIP, because that kid's getting possessed and killed first, but secondly, Ouija
entities cannot take a joke. They probably don't even know what a joke is. It's not in their purgatory vocabulary. All they know is death and suffering. Do you really think the entity is just gonna flicker the lights or something to signal to you that they laughed? No, they're gonna send a piece of window shard straight through your eye, mate.
I was just thinking of a ghost being like, ha. Honestly, exactly what she said. I mean, maybe they could do like a knock knock joke, but still, nothing is funny when it comes to the spirit world. It needs to be taken pretty seriously.
What if like the entity is trying to make a joke by like lighting something on fire or something? It's like, we have different definitions of humor.
Exactly.
This is not funny. Coming in at number 5 is murder. I understand that spirits and entities on the other side of the Ouija board kind of get a bad rep. We've seen the movies, we've heard the stories. Hell, I did like a 5-part series on Ouija boards that destroyed lives, so believe me when I say these spirits are not received well. But the one cardinal rule of Ouija boards, other than always closing your session, is to never ask the entity if they're going to kill you. Firstly, it's bloody rude. You can't just generalize all Ouija spirits and assume the one you're talking to is evil and full of bloodlust. Spirits have feelings too, and some are actually nice. Some just want to talk, like how about you ask them how their day was for once? Purgatory sucks. Okay, sorry. I digress. This question could also be viewed as disrespectful towards a spirit, which could anger them and make them overstay their welcome. Or if they weren't planning to kill you before, they probably are now, so adios, amigo.
Coming in at number 4 is the spirit's presence. There's a lot of people out there that want to witness paranormal activity firsthand. We like to call these people crazies. No, I'm just kidding. I understand where they're coming from.
Like, I would shit myself.
Like, in order to make up their mind about whether or not ghosts are real, they kind of need to experience it firsthand. But whatever you do, do not ask a spirit to show themselves or to make noise. There's way too many scary movies out there where this happens and they are greeted with a terrifying pop-up of a disfigured face. So, do you really want to see that?
Definitely not. I would for sure defecate on the spot. Now sometimes a spirit isn't malevolent and shows you it's there by opening a door or manifesting a gust of wind, but most spirits are dark and will manifest by possessing your friend or throwing the board against the wall. They're already answering your questions by moving the planchette. You don't need to disrespect them further by being like, oh, can you just confirm you're real and not a myth? Cheers.
Coming in at number 3, we have don't ask about Zozo. If you are new to the spirit realm, you may be wondering, Lindsay, who or what is Zozo? Well, Zozo is a sinister demon that is known to harm or trick Ouija board players. Zozo has been linked to murders and suicides all throughout the world. He has caused mental and physical harm to players, and in one situation, he was responsible for the near death of a young kid. Zozo will often wait until the players are vulnerable and then he will harm them. He may also pretend to be a friendly spirit, will try to befriend you, and then trick and harm you. In fact, some players who contacted Zozo have been subjected to extreme bad luck, and others have become very depressed. So I recommend never asking questions about Zozo, like, can I speak to Zozo? Trust me, you don't want to mess around with this demon.
Now at number 2 is how you're going to die. Now I've thought about this question so much, like would I want to know how I'm gonna die? Like, of course, on one hand, I'd like to know because then I could spend the rest of my life preparing for it, because not gonna lie, I'm terrified of dying. On the other hand, I'd rather not know, so it's not like a cloud hanging over my head for the rest of my life. I already have the depression cloud, I don't need another one. The reason you should never ask a Ouija spirit about your death is simply because they may not know or the answer could change. Would you ask?
No, are you crazy?
I would want to know.
No, I wouldn't want to know. I'd be like huddled in a corner like,
save me.
So let's say the board tells you that you're gonna die in a car crash. Well, wouldn't that make you terrified of driving? You'd get in your car every day wondering what day is going to be your last. It could cause you to become overly anxious or overly cautious. Either way, you would be fearing for your life daily. And in our number 1 spot, we have the death date. Listen carefully when I say this, okay? Never, and I mean never, under any circumstance, ask the board when you're going to die. I mean, that seems like a given, but you wouldn't believe the number of people that ask the board this question. So, for starters, who even wants to know the day they're going to die? I certainly don't. But anyways, it's safe to say that you would be scared out of your mind if the board told you that you were going to die soon. Not only that, but maybe the spirit is an evil one that will try and manipulate you with this date so that you purposely fear for your life. Over on Reddit, there are tons of concerned posts from people who were told that they only had a month left to live. They were too scared to go outside and continue to live a normal life. It completely ruined their life for a month. Not only that, but you could create a self-fulfilling prophecy and die on the date that the board said you would. This happened to one man. He was told he had only a couple weeks left to live and he became super ill. He felt sick all the time and did pass away on the exact date, but he died from dehydration and malnutrition. He just wasn't caring for himself properly, and that's why he died.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Zozo. Would this be a list of Ouija board demons without Zozo? Zozo seems to have not been around for very long, but he is powerful, and in fact, as we talk about him, he only gains strength. Zozo is a demon who, if summoned during a Ouija board experience, even if you close everything properly and say goodbye as you should, you'll still be able to feel his presence lingering around for quite some time afterward. Many people have recounted their stories with Zozo, and while he is a demon, he acts like a poltergeist and has attempted to harm people, or at the very least has been known to throw furniture and other possessions around. These are only a few of the reasons why, if you find that you've summoned Zozo, it's imperative you close the Ouija board properly and then also probably burn it after too, just to be safe, you know? In our number 9 spot today we have the Donovan family. In the early 1970s, famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren were called to the home of the Donovan family, and when they arrived they found them all terrified. They witnessed loud pounding and other inhuman noises coming from inside of the walls, the wallpaper was peeling, and the water was running red. The Warrens began their investigation, and this included asking them questions to try and find out if there was a source of the haunting, such as a recently passed away family member or some kind of new secondhand item. Through this questioning, it was revealed that one member of the family had used a Ouija board and ended up contacting someone who had died in the neighborhood 10 years earlier. The Warrens knew it was time for them to call a priest because they believed that the entity that had been reached through the Ouija board was actually a demon just posing as the person who had passed away. Following an exorcism, it is said that things in the home slowly returned to normal, but the events stayed with the entire family. One member who witnessed the hauntings and the exorcism said, quote, "I nor anyone else in my family have ever before witnessed anything so weird and terrifying." In our number 8 spot today we have Aciel. Aciel is one of the electors of hell and is monitored by the archangel Raphael. Aciel is one of the 7 planetary demons, as he is the demon of Saturn. He dwells in the bowels of Earth and can be summoned by being invoked 3 times, but he will only appear in a magical circle that has been prepared specifically for him. His appearance is basically that of a tall, buff demon with reddish brown skin. He has 4 horns on each side of his head and has creepy yellow eyes. He does have a human form in which he appears as a handsome man, but only stands around 3 feet tall in this form. He believes in the superiority of demons to ordinary beings, and he holds a lot of anger towards any kind of deity. He does have the power to make those who summon him rich, and the good news is that he doesn't have a lot of disdain for humans, but the catch is as long as you don't worship any kind of god. Aciel shows great respects for both Lilith and Lucifer, as he believes that the gods don't do anything other than sit and watch as people struggle in sin. So I guess with him, as long as you are not a god, you're probably safe, but I wouldn't risk summoning him, just in case. In our number 7 spot today we have Naki. The Naki is a demonic jinn that originated in Estonian, Finnish, and Swedish mythology. She sometimes appears as a floating tree trunk, a large black horse, a hound, a silvery fish, a beautiful woman, or an ugly fisherman. With all these shapes and forms, it's no wonder people say that they aren't really sure what she actually looks like. She lives in the water and she waits until some unsuspecting person catches their reflection in it, and that is when she strikes, pulling them into the waters below. It is said that her favorite places to make her home are in under bridges that cross rivers, docks, or piers, or in murky pools and wells. The good thing is that there are ways to ward off her evil, and that is by either reciting a magical spell 3 times before entering the water, wearing a charm made of iron, or by keeping a knife near you in the water. I think that last one is probably the least ideal of all of the options if you have the choice though. In our number 6 spot today we have Beelzebub. Beelzebub is a former seraph who turned into a high-ranking demon. He is one of the princes of hell and also oversees the Order of the Fly. He, Satan, and Lucifer form the triarchy of hell, which makes him one of the supreme monarchs of the underworld. As a seraphim, he was under the archangel Gabriel, but he was one of the very first angels to fall. Beelzebub is often confused with Satan, and while the two names names can technically be interchanged, they are two separate entities, and in some writings, they even disagree. Beelzebub is associated with pride and gluttony, and he has also been held responsible for demonic possessions throughout the years. Unfortunately, flies are a very important thing for him, as it is said that he can take the form of flies. Now, his main job is to rule over the fallen angels, as well as all the demons that are originally from hell. In our number 5 spot today, we have Lilith. Lilith is a demon goddess who appears a lot in mythology. Her dark origins start in Sumerian and Babylonian demonology, and she is the picture of a beautiful maiden with a very dark spirit. Legend says once she chose a lover, she would never let him go and would give nothing in return. Some people believe that Lilith was actually the first wife of Adam, and that the two were created equal, but Adam didn't like that she wasn't obedient to him, so he abandoned her, and this is when God made Eve. This is what is rumored to have turned Lilith into a snake, which then tempted Eve into the apple. After Adam and Eve were then banished from the Garden of Eden, Lilith turned into a demon goddess and vowed to get her revenge on all men. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Jorogumo. This creature, according to lore, is said to be a yokai that is half woman, half spider. She has the ability to appear as a beautiful human in order to lure unsuspecting men so that she can devour them like a black widow. Legend has it that one day a young samurai encountered an alluringly gorgeous woman on the streets. Many people would have been fooled by her appearance, but the samurai was not so naive. He saw through the disguise and immediately drew his sword, but he was only able to injure her before she was able to scurry away. He followed the trail of scarlet that was left by her blood, and it led him to an old abandoned house. When he peered inside, he saw dozens of bodies that were bound in spider silk. In our number 3 spot today, we have the demonic animal. One more story from the Warrens. This one came straight from Ed himself. He told this story when he was trying to set an example of how things of the occult and the supernatural certainly are not for amateurs or for the faint of heart. He used this story of a girl who was playing with a Ouija board. You know, how all good supernatural stories start. She asked for proof of a spirit presence, and she got a lot more than she bargained for. Ed Warren said, quote, "She got this proof with 2 days and 2 nights of hell. Apparently it started off with a manifestation of sort of an animal form walking on her bed. This then turned physical, and whatever this entity was left her with bruises. It is said that thankfully the mother in the home saw what was happening and she took action. She not only prayed by the girl's bedside, but she also sprinkled holy water. There was a 2-day vigil in which everyone tried to rid the girl of this demonic presence that she had summoned, and thankfully it worked." In our number 2 spot today, we have Tukolshi. This creature originated in South Africa, and it appears in Zulu mythology. It is said that this creature is quite short, but very frightening. What it lacks in height, it makes up for in a vertical better than Michael Jordan in his prime. Legend has it that this creature likes to jump on people's chests at night while they are sleeping so that it can steal their breath away. Aside from the whole jumping thing, it is said that this creature is also quite fast, and one kind of random fact is that it apparently loves curdled milk, which is disgusting. So while he's stealing your breath, I guess you just have to sit there smelling his hot curdled milk breath. 0 out of 10. Would not recommend. There is a way to protect yourself against him, and that is by putting your bed on high bricks. This is because if the bed is raised too high, then this malevolent being won't be able to just jump up on your chest to complete its breath-stealing work. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Hades. Hades is the king of the underworld and the god of the dead, and I'm not sure if it gets any darker than that. It was believed that just by speaking his name, he would have the power to bring you to the underworld, so people tried to avoid his name like it was Voldemort. Hades was sure to never let any souls that entered the underworld escape, and he would punish anyone who tried, or anyone who tried to save someone in the underworld. One of the darkest myths in reference to him is the time he kidnapped Persephone. He opened up the earth where she was picking flowers and kept her in the underworld. Persephone's mother Demeter was of course really unhappy about this and did everything that she could to get her back. Hades finally agreed to let her go, but of course there's always a twist with these guys. He gave her a pomegranate seed as a parting gift, which she ate. Little did she know, if you eat food from the underworld, it binds you to it, so now she is bound to Hades, and basically the story just ends off with her being allowed to live a few months of the year on Earth, but the rest of the time she was stuck in the underworld. So yeah, Hades is just out there kidnapping people, which is super uncool. Don't summon him with a Ouija board. unless you want to get kidnapped.
Starting off this countdown, we have the rules. So for those of you who don't know, Ouija boards come with a strict set of rules. When I was young and dumb, I never knew these rules, and me and my friends would just fool around with no care. Seriously, like, the board doesn't come with a set of instructions. At least the one that I had didn't. But these rules are super important. Let me stress that again. Super important. Basically, if you don't accurately follow them, then it puts all the players at risk. So here are some important rules to follow. And in no means is this meant to be like a guide for you to use. So you should always say goodbye when you're done playing. And by saying goodbye, I mean you actually say it verbally and then you move the planchette to goodbye. This should cut the connection between the spiritual world and our world. You also can never tease, disrespect, or make fun of the spirits or board. This angers them. You should never play alone. This makes you more vulnerable to being attacked by evil spirits. Never play in a cemetery. It's pretty self-explanatory. Never ask the board when you're going to die. Never burn the board. Never invite the entity to make noise or show itself. And lastly, never ever leave the planchette on the board. It's considered bad luck. There are several more rules you have to follow, but basically if you mess up the rules or don't follow them, then it puts yourself in danger. In our ninth spot, we have the manipulation. Ouija boards open the doors for anything to come through to speak to you. What's scary is that you don't know the intentions of the spirits that you get in contact with. In fact, it's said that evil spirits will often manipulate the players to gain their trust. They may do so by telling you information you want to hear. They may claim that they're a deceased relative, but in turn, they can just say that so that they can gain control of you. Once you let your guard down, thinking you're in contact with a peaceful spirit, then they can use this to get into our world and wreak havoc on your life. Moving on to number 8, we have the connection. If you are foolish enough to play with an Ouija board, just know that you should never use it in your home. The reason being, well, if you don't properly break the connection between the spirits you summoned, then guess what? They are now going to be residing in your home. Basically, they will feed off your energy and try to weaken you to gain control of you. Their energy will constantly be present in your home and you'll be subjected to constant torment. In our 7th spot, we have the malevolent spirits. Like I mentioned before, the Ouija board opens the doors to the spiritual world. There's no way to predict or control what comes through. As a result, you may get in contact with a malevolent spirit with sinister intentions. They could physically and mentally hurt you. Now, if you're using the board and the planchette starts counting down or going through the alphabet, then you should immediately end your session by saying goodbye. A lot of users claim that this is one sign that you have gotten in contact with an evil spirit. Another warning sign is if the planchette repeatedly makes a figure 8 or infinity symbol. Again, you should end the session immediately by saying goodbye. This is another thing that evil spirits will do. So stay safe and please don't allow evil spirits into our world. Moving on to number 6, we have the possession. Okay. One of the more obvious reasons to why you shouldn't use the board is because you could become possessed. This isn't a joke. There have been several reports of Ouija boards triggering demonic possessions. In November 2014, 35 students at a school in Bolivia were all sent to the hospital after playing with an Ouija board. It was believed that they all became possessed. They had fallen into a trance-like state, were profusely sweating, were more aggressive, and had rapid pulses. Then, over the years, there have been other reports of people getting possessed while using this board. Mexico especially is said to have a lot of reported possessions. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the creepy doll. Now, if you still think that it's okay to play with an Ouija board, then here is a true story that will convince you otherwise. This story was posted on Reddit by the user Jake Nichols. He shares the time that him and his family were using a Ouija board in their basement. Good family bonding, I guess. At first, the board wasn't really working. Then out of nowhere, it said one of the guy's social security number. Then the entity started sharing more creepy personal information. The last thing the entity spelled out was the word doll. Well, prior to playing with the board, the group moved a porcelain doll out of the room and placed it on a stack of towels. They did this because they were creeped out of having the doll in the same room as them. After the Ouija board spelled the word doll, they heard a knock on the door where they put the porcelain doll in. When they opened the door, the doll was now standing upright, straight in front of them, staring at them. Moving on to number 4, we have the death date. Again, this is a real story. This story was posted on Reddit by the user Anuvin. Basically, there was this one girl who was friends with a boy named Johnny who was suffering from cystic fibrosis. As a result, he was recently hospitalized. One day, her and her friend Shelly decided to play with an Ouija board. One of the questions they asked was about Johnny's condition. But all the board did was spell out the date, June 24th, 1987. Well, on June 24th, Johnny sadly passed away. That's crazy. It just shows you how powerful these spirits are and how much they know about us and our lives. In our third spot, we have the injuries. Demons or evil spirits are very, very powerful and should never be underestimated. If you come in contact with one while playing, then they could physically or mentally harm you. In fact, one man who played with an Ouija board claims that he woke up with sore, unexplained bruises all over his body. Another woman was playing with the board when she felt like she was being choked. She couldn't breathe, and later there were bruise marks on her neck. Other players claim that they have been scratched by entities, and one even claims that after using the board, he was pushed down the stairs by something that they had contacted. In our second spot, we have Zozo. Using an Ouija board puts you at risk for contacting an evil demon known as Zozo. On March 24th, 2009, the presence of Zozo first came to light when a man named Darren Evans shared his interactions with Zozo online. He was playing with the board when he contacted a spirit who called itself Zozo. At first, according to Evans' account, the interactions with Zozo were seemingly harmless. He experienced noises, moving objects, and flickering lights. Then he started getting scratches and bruises on his skin. During one session with Zozo, he had to rush into the bathroom where his girlfriend was giving their 1-year-old daughter a bath. His girlfriend was gone, and the tub was overflowing, and his daughter was drowning. He believes that Zozo was behind this. Now, you see, tons of other people have come forward and claimed that they have also come in contact with a spirit that calls itself Zozo. It is said to target mentally unstable and vulnerable users. Zozo even has been linked to murders and suicides throughout the world. In fact, this entity dates back to 1816. It is mentioned in the book Dictionnaire Infernal by Colin de Plancy. This book tells the story of a young girl who gets possessed by 3 demons: Minnie, Capulet, and Zozo. It's said that if Zozo reveals itself while you're using the board, to end the session immediately before you become his next victim. And in our number 1 spot, we have the death. This reason alone should prevent you from playing with an Ouija board. It is said that the board can kill you. Well, not the board itself, although I'm sure some people have used it as a weapon sometime in their life. But no, the board itself isn't deadly, it's the spirits you get in contact with that are. So evil spirits can kill you in multiple ways. They could cause you to get a viral disease by attacking your immune system. They can manipulate you mentally so that you end up taking your own life. Or they can cause unexplained accidents. In fact, one girl claims that a spirit that her and her friends contacted was responsible for her friend's mother's death. Apparently, after contacting the spirit through the board, a week later, her mom's friend died suddenly from cancer. Then the same week, her own mom was rushed into the emergency room, but thankfully, she survived. In another account, a girl says that her grandmother was killed after messing with an Ouija board. Later that day, her grandmother was struck and killed by a distracted driver. So not only do Ouija boards have the power to take your life, but they can also kill your loved ones too.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Mo. This story comes from an anonymous source, but we'll call them Taylor. Taylor and their fiance, who we'll call Sam, were given a Ouija board that their friend had apparently found on the side of the road, which I feel like is the worst place to find a new Ouija board. Taylor and Sam decided to use it one night and began to ask questions. They asked who was with them and if they were an angel, demon, or spirit. It replied that their name was Mo and that they were a demon by your creation. Taylor and Sam were obviously freaked out and just asked a few more simple questions like, what is your favorite poster of ours on the wall? Mo replied with, bloody mess. Taylor and Sam had a kiss photo with Gene Simmons on it that had blood everywhere. Taylor pointed to that poster and asked, this one? Mo said yes. Taylor and Sam had a few skeleton heads that sat on their TV, so they asked Mo to move the skeleton heads so that they could have proof that Mo was real. Mo said to close their eyes, so they did. A few seconds later, all of the skulls on the TV had moved to be facing them. Only Sam and Taylor were in the room at the time, and they had been sitting right next to each other, which would have made it impossible for them to be playing a prank on one another. In our number 9 spot today, we have Foul. One day when this Reddit user was around 16 years old, they found a real old school wooden Ouija board at a thrift store. I probably would have run in the opposite direction, but they ended up purchasing it. Later that evening, they and a friend decided to try it out and asked a few questions, but never got a response. They of course got bored and left the board out on the bed and headed out of the house to go and get some snacks, which was a big old mistake. Never leave a Ouija board without saying goodbye. When they got back, they realized that the planchette was now moving, but completely on its own. The word foul was being spelled out over and over again, and the two just stared at it in absolute awe. Eventually they grabbed the board, broke it, and covered it with salt before they got rid of it in a safe place. I definitely think that this experience was probably the last time they ever used a Ouija board, and I hope the salt was enough to keep the demon at bay. In our number 8 spot today we have X. Listen, a demon is never a good thing, but a demon named X actually sounds kinda cool. I'm gonna go ahead and guess that the people who contacted him through a Ouija board might disagree with me, however. This Ouija board story starts a couple months after the storyteller's mom had passed away. She was at a friend's house one night and passed out after a few too many drinks and later awoke to find her friends playing with a Ouija board. The friends were in tears and were claiming that her mother was trying to contact them through the board. The storyteller hadn't ever used a Ouija board before and wasn't really sure if she believed in it, but she agreed to at least check out what they were saying, if for anything, to prove them wrong. As she moved over to the board, the presence claimed again to be her mom and spelled out XOXOXO, which was what her mother always ended text messages with. Okay, this sounds like a really nice Ouija board experience so far, right? Suddenly, they all felt a different energy throughout the whole room. This energy was heavy, and whatever this energy was, it took over the board. They asked its name, and the entity said X. They asked when it was born, and it moved the planchette to 0. After this, they saw a beam of light shoot from the wall and into the storyteller's eye. No one knew what was happening, so they all finished the session, closed the board up, and vowed to never touch it again. In our number 7 spot today, we have Damien. One day, a woman named Abby had been playing around with a Ouija board for a while and ended up contacting an otherworldly presence who said their name was Damien. Once she was finished asking her questions, she packed up the board and put it away. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, she noticed that her computer screen changed from black to blue, which meant that it had been turned on somehow when she hadn't touched it. She turned the computer off again, and it once again turned itself on. This is already super strange and creepy, but she chalked it up to some glitch and just unplugged the computer. The computer, of course, somehow begins to start up again, even though it was unplugged. Abby ended up burying the Ouija board in her backyard, and hopefully that works, but I'm feeling a little worried that Abby didn't close her session and say goodbye properly, and maybe Damien is still lurking around there somewhere. In our number 6 spot today, we have Shush. Two friends decided that one night they would try their hand at a Ouija board. They weren't exactly familiar with the whole process, but they decided to give it a whirl regardless. They tried for a little bit to ask some questions, but weren't really getting many answers, so they decided to return to the top and try asking just a few more. They asked if anyone was there that would like to answer some questions for them, and as it turns out, whoever was listening at that point had had enough. The planchette immediately moved to no. The friends thought this was finally their chance to talk with someone from the other side, so they pushed further and decided to ask more questions despite the answer they had just received. The presence, of course, didn't like this and just simply wanted to be left alone. This is when the presence decided to take hold of the planchette and spell out SHUSH. Yup. Shush. After this, the friends said that the room felt considerably colder, and they decided that they better not stick around to find out what happens if they chose not to listen to what this presence just asked of them. I gotta say, that was probably for the best. In our number 5 spot today, we have Joe. Joe isn't necessarily the first name that comes to mind when making a list of spooky demons, but this story that was posted on Reddit might just make me think differently. They explained that a few months ago, one of their friends brought over a Ouija board. There were around 5 of them at this sleepover, and they all began playing around with it and asking questions, and that is when they met Joe. After about an hour of questions and answers with Joe, one of the girls asked, "Joe, are you a bad spirit?" Joe answered, "N-O." Okay, that's good. But then Joe spelled out H-I-M. The girls asked him who he was talking about, and that's when he spelled out the words "He's coming." That ended up being the end of the Ouija board experience for the girls that night because how terrifying. But they decided in the morning to try again. This time they began speaking to someone who apparently claimed to be Joe's wife. They asked her if Joe was a bad spirit, to which she quickly replied, "Y-E-S." In our number 4 spot today we have Ed. A girl named Tammy and her sister used to mess around with Ouija boards when they were bored as teenagers, which sounds like the perfect plot of a B-roll horror film. Every time the pair used the board, they always came into contact with the same spirit who was named Ed. Ed wasn't horrible to the girls, but he would often threaten the girls' little brother, despite the fact that he was not playing with a board with them. It scared the girls so much that they eventually threw the board out. They never mentioned it to their brother because he was only 5 or 6 at the time, and it just wasn't worth freaking him out when they thought that they had taken care of it. Flash forward quite a few years later, and one day the little brother comes home with a friend. His friend brought a Ouija board and the two started playing around with it. After they finished, the brother explained to his sisters that he was super freaked out. They asked why, and he explained that he had contacted some demon named Ed, and Ed kept threatening him. Their mom ended up banning Ouija boards in the house after that day. In our number 3 spot today we have the Unnamed Demon. This Ouija board story comes from someone named Paige, and unfortunately they weren't able to get this demon's name before they had to stop their Ouija board experience. When Paige was a kid, she moved into a new house that was way bigger but also way older than the one that they had lived in before, with her teenage sister and her mom. On the first night in the new house, the lady sat on the floor and ate pizza, as you do when you move into a new house, and Paige's sister convinced their mom to let them play with a Ouija board. They started trying to make some sort of contact when a heavy box of books went flying across the living room out of nowhere. They were also in the living room, which had a fireplace, and earlier in the evening they had lit a fire. Right after the box flew across the room, the fire completely went out. Paige's mom was so freaked out that they all went and slept at their grandmother's house that night, which was probably the best idea that they've had all week. In our number 2 spot today we have Zozo. Would this be a list of Ouija board demons without Zozo? I think not. Zozo seems to have not been around for a very long time, but he is powerful, and in fact, as we talk about him, he only gains strength. Zozo is a demon who, if summoned during a Ouija board experience, even if you close everything properly and say goodbye as you should, you'll still be able to feel his presence lingering around for quite some time afterward. Many people have recounted their stories with Zozo, and while he is a demon, he acts like a poltergeist and has attempted to harm people, or at the very least has been known to throw furniture and other possessions around. These are only a few of the reasons why, if you find that you've summoned Zozo, it's imperative you close the Ouija board properly, and then also probably burn it after too, just to be safe. In our number 1 spot today we have Blanche. This story comes from the Reddit user Turtleshell Magic, and it involves their friends M and L. So one night the 3 of them were at M's house and decided to crack open the good old Ouija board for a little spooky fun. They contacted some sort of spirit whose name was Blanche and who lived sometime in the 1800s, and everything was going well until M asked Blanche how they died, and she replied with the word killing. M asked how they had been killed, and Blanche said, "Not I." From there, everything started to get really heavy and the room felt really different. All of a sudden, the board was ripped from their hands and went flying across the room. They stopped playing immediately, but I don't think they closed everything properly. After this incident, M's mom passed away just a week after from an illness that no one knew she had. Not long after this, L's mom was hospitalized, and then shortly after that, Turtleshell's mom had to have emergency surgery. Maybe this was just all some horrible coincidence, but Turtleshell says that since then, they have experienced things that they think are directly related to what happened that night. Things like hearing voices, dark shadows, hearing footsteps. They find themselves wondering if they're still haunted despite it having been 9 years since that night.
Starting us off at number 10 is a sleep paralysis demon. If you've never heard of sleep paralysis before, it's essentially a horrible phenomenon where your mind is conscious but your body is unable to move or speak, and often the mind will hallucinate. Part of these hallucinations is the sleep paralysis demon, which creepily most describe the exact same way. And it's one thing to have sleep paralysis on a regular basis, it's a totally other eerie and spooky thing when you only get it after playing with a Ouija board. According to one Reddit user, that is exactly what happened to him. From a now deleted account, the story explained,
explained, quote, "My buddy and I found a Ouija board at my girlfriend's house. We were really bored, so we went to this graveyard by my house to see if it actually worked. As suspected, nothing happened. We brought the board back to my house and didn't think anything of it. The next day, strange things began happening. Out of nowhere, my friend started having sleep paralysis every time he spent the night at my house, despite never having it before. The first time he saw a tall woman with long black hair standing in the corner of a room facing the wall. The next time he was asleep on the couch and he saw the same woman standing at my open door looking directly into my room. I mean, could it be a coincidence? Maybe. But still, if it were me, that Ouija board would be taken away as far as possible." Coming in at number 9 is a man-faced dog. It's one thing when you use a board and start seeing things, but to me it seems like a whole other ordeal when someone else uses one and other people around them start noticing strange things. I guess I just mean that if you are expecting to see something weird, the chances are you'll start to find the strange in the ordinary around you. But when you weren't involved in the session, or better yet had no idea it happened, then seeing inexplicable things just hits different. For example, one Redditor from a now deleted account posted saying, quote, "My brother's friend played with one at his house and all hell broke loose. Their family would see pennies and marbles being thrown down the hallway. One day his mom was doing yard work and saw a dog, and when she called the dog, she said that it suddenly had an old man's face. Things got so awful that they had to call a priest to do an emergency exorcism. To this day, they still see black shadow figures follow them around." I mean, there are many things I would like to go my whole life without seeing, and a shape-shifting man-faced dog is definitely one of them. Next up at number 8, levitating. Even if you tend to lean toward a believer's side, I think it's safe to say that there are some things that can be explained away. Objects flying across the room could be due to a gust of wind from an open window. Lights flickering could be faulty wiring. Strange noises could be creaks or cracks in the floorboards, and so on. But if there's one thing I would have a hard time explaining away, it would be witnessing something or someone free floating in the air. Well, as it so happens, one anonymous Reddit user said that when they were in the 10th grade, they had an experience just like that shook them to the core. According to them, quote, "In the 10th grade at a Halloween party, 4 of us were playing with one. The planchette suddenly lifted straight off of the board and raised all of our hands at least a foot into the air, then dropped. We all jumped out of our chairs and ran away screaming." I mean, I don't blame them. I used to get freaked out if the planchette even moved, so I have no idea what I would do if it levitated off the ground. Just another reason to stay away from these terrifying boards. Coming in at number 7, a possessed cat. According to those who practice magic, there are lots of different precautions that can and should be taken before you begin a session with a Ouija board. But the problem is that Ouija boards have been popularized so much so that anyone can get their hands on one. Like, I've literally seen them for sale in a Walmart before. Obviously, most preteens don't know these rules, and so when they get their hands on one to play a goofy game, things get weird. According to one story I found on Reddit, they explain what happened to them when they were young. Quote, "I was 13 years old and staying at a friend's house overnight. She had somehow managed to sneak a Ouija board past her super religious mom, and after her parents went to bed, we used it. We asked the board some typical 13-year-old girl questions, nothing happened, and we went to bed. But that night, her mom's new kitten started acting weird. He was wailing and running head first into walls. We woke up to it sitting in the middle of the kitchen, twitching and staring off into space. That week they took it to the vet, who said the kitten had a neurological problem and had to have it put down immediately. To this day, my friend and I are convinced that the kitten was possessed. I mean, I know there isn't a test that can be taken to check if the kitty really was possessed, but is it not suspicious that it only started acting like that after the Ouija board? Just saying. Coming in at number 6, fire be gone. There are lots of different horror movies involving the Ouija board, and honestly, for good reason. Just take a quick little Google search and you will be hit with a tsunami of stories about all the unexplainable things that have happened to people while using one or right after using one. One of these crazy stories came from a Reader's Digest from a girl named Paige and was about the first and last time she ever used a Ouija board. Quote, I was about 6 or 7 and I was with my mom and older sister who was about 15 at the time. The family had just moved into their new home, which they were really excited about because it was bigger than their old house, but it also happened to be much older. The first night in their new home, Paige was sitting with her sister and mom on the living room floor eating pizza, and they set up a fire in the fireplace. After dinner, her sister begged her mom to let them play with the Ouija board, and as Paige explained, quote, as we were using it, a box in the living room that had some books in it literally flew across the room. Next thing they knew, the fire went out in a flash, like full flames to nothing in a second. Apparently Paige's mom was so freaked out that she made them stop the game and took the girls to stay the night at their grandmother's house. I mean, I've heard of a lot of weird things happening, but a fire mysteriously going out in a flash would definitely send chills down my spine, and it for sure seems like it had something to do with the board. Coming in at number 5, a creepy computer. It makes sense that as we progress as humans via technology, that the demons of other dimensions progress with us. For example, have you ever heard of the girl who claims that she was being texted by a demon that was possessing her? Well, at first it could sound a little woohoo. I mean, it kind of makes sense. It's a different world out there than it was hundreds of years ago, and so if they want to try and freak us out, they have to adjust to our new way of life. One of these creepy tech stories was posted online by someone named Abby, who said she was in her room one night after playing with a Ouija board earlier that day. But as she was getting ready for bed, her computer screen turned on completely by itself, changing from black to blue. Quote, I thought it was strange, but just turned off the computer and went to bed. But again, only moments later the computer turned back on again, all by itself. Abby began to feel anxious, so she decided to just unplug it completely for peace of mind. Not 30 seconds goes by before the unplugged computer starts up again. I mean, if there's an explanation behind that, please tell me, because as far as I understand, that shouldn't be possible. Terrified that some kind of entity had been released into the realm via her Ouija games earlier that day, Abby buried her board in the backyard and never touched it again. Coming in at number 4, Ouija made me do it. So there are lots of wild stories out there surrounding the elusive Ouija board, but the ones I always find the most terrifying are the people who claim they themselves were possessed by an entity through the board and were driven to extreme or even illegal measures. Whether you prescribe to these kinds of stories or not, Paul Carroll claims that a Ouija board ruined his entire life. As he tells it, he decided to use a Ouija board Christmas Eve of 2014 in an attempt to contact the dead, which apparently worked. Carroll claims that through the session an evil spirit possessed his family dog Molly, and so he felt he was left with no choice but to take her life. While trying to dispose of the mutilated canine body, he was caught and arrested. But the story doesn't stop there. Just 1 week after his guilty plea, Paul's wife and daughter also decided to use the family board. Apparently this time they were told that they were going to die, and shockingly, the following day both of them took an overdose of prescription drugs and set the house on fire. To everyone's surprise, the women ended up surviving the ordeal but were both jailed for arson, claiming, just as Paul had, that the Ouija board made them do it. Coming in at number 3, an evil doll. Now, it wouldn't be a creepy list without a haunted evil doll, now would it? One doll meets Ouija board story in particular was posted to a Reddit thread that asked about scary paranormal encounters, and user Jake Nichols told the story about when he and his cousins used a Ouija board at their home when they were younger. Like any good Ouija session, they picked the creepiest room in any house to use, the basement. But before they began, they decided it would be a good idea to remove the large, creepy porcelain doll, so they took it to another room and placed it face down. Once the ball got rolling, the board started listing a string of numbers that Jake's cousin immediately recognized as his social security number, which no one else at the table knew. I mean, I have to admit, that is pretty specific and would definitely freak me out. But it was nothing compared to what happened next. When the group asked the spirit to prove itself, it promptly spelt the word D-O-L-L. At this point, the whole table is covered in goosebumps, and then they realize that they have to go and check on the doll in the other room. To their horror, when they opened the door, the large doll was standing upright in the middle of the room, staring right at them, almost as if it had been waiting for them to check up on it. Naturally, they burned the board and no one in the family ever dared to play again. I just hope they also got rid of the doll. Coming in at number 2, an evil demon. It's one thing to accidentally contact a spooky or taunting spirit, but according to one post I found online by an anonymous user, they accidentally let in a dangerous spirit that not only tortured them, but actually assaulted them on more than one occasion. Quote, "It started out with that feeling like you're being watched, and doors closing, and footsteps on the hardwood when you're home alone, and progressed slowly into being kept awake by something shaking the bed or pulling off your covers. Sometimes even whispering your name. The board would disappear for days on end, then show up in places you never would have put it. I became obsessed with it. Then there was a black mass in the corner of the room, or the silhouette of a man watching you from the doorway. After that, it escalated quickly. I had my hair pulled, fingers pricked, scratched, choked, held down in bed, while this thing whispered in my ear what could have only been Latin. We had our house blessed, and the bad thing hasn't shown back up. Just the normal occurrences now. But I will never again play with one of those boards. Believe me, I would not either if that happened to me. And last up today on our number 1 spot, Carol Sue Elvaker. One of the scariest stories surrounding a Ouija board was the tragedy of Carol Sue Elvaker, a woman with no prior criminal record and no history of mental health problems, seemingly out of nowhere, took the life of her son-in-law in February of 2001. According to Elvaker's story, she had used a Ouija board which she claims sent her a message from the beyond. Now, I wasn't able to find exactly what she was using the Ouija board for in the first place, but either way, what she heard in her session changed her life forever. The message essentially told her that her daughter's husband was possessed by an evil spirit and that he had to be taken down. So one night in February, Elvaker stabbed her son-in-law Brian Roach in his sleep and then continued on attempting to take the life of the rest of her daughter's family by bundling them up in her car and trying to get into a car crash. I should also mention her daughter was charged for accessory to the crime, as she hid the knife and then seemed to aid in getting her family into the car. Thankfully, no one else in the family was killed, but after the instigated car crash, Elvaker broke both her ankles and stripped naked before making a run for it into the woods. During her trial for the ordeal, she claimed that God had spoken to her through the board to kill Brian, and essentially had no remorse. Unsurprisingly, this did not hold up in court, and so Carol Sue Elvaker was deemed criminally insane and sent to live in an institution.
Starting us off at number 10, we have The Spirit. This one's from Reddit user Gothsby29, who shared that this occurred a few days after her ex had lost his friend in an airplane crash. The couple took out the Ouija board to use it, and the friend was very present, very scared, and very much wanting to communicate. Now the duo got a bit freaked out and decided to stop using it, and as soon as they did, the user felt this presence in the corner of the room. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, and all of a sudden the planchette started moving around the board, spelling words on its own. Exhausted and now drained, the user took a nap, and 30 exact minutes later she bolted out of bed because she saw the skeletal spirit standing in the corner of the room. The spirit ran at her and started screaming with a massive black mouth. The user obviously started screaming, and her boyfriend woke up and tried to get it off her, but then she just ran straight out of the house. Coming in at number 9 is the Mars Volta. Now the Mars Volta was an American progressive rock band that were active from 2001 to 2012. The guitarist of the band, Omar, bought an antique Ouija board at a flea market in Jerusalem as a birthday gift for lead singer of the band, Cedric. Now the two started playing with the board in the tour bus after their shows, and they ended up contacting a spirit named Goliath. Its responses were innocent at first, but Omar got nervous since Goliath started making threatening demands, and Cedric was getting more and more obsessed with contacting him. Omar ended up secretly burying the board, but that did nothing to stop Goliath. It usually never does. The band started being terrorized with mishaps and chaos after that point. Equipment started having severe problems, Omar's studio was wiped out in a freak flood, their drummer quit, and Cedric suffered from a critical foot injury. All this happened in such a short period of time, and it all happened after Omar got rid of the Ouija board that he was convinced that these things were happening because of Goliath. And boy, you are not wrong. At number 8 we have the horse. This one was shared by Redditor Overdose Baby Blue, who said her mum always used to warn her about using Ouija boards because of what she went through herself. The mum shared that during one instance of using a Ouija board, the spirit they were talking to seemed quite violent and actually had it in for her. She shrugged it off and got in her car to go home as everything was normal. But as she was driving home, a horse literally appeared out of nowhere and started running towards her car. The mum ended up hitting it and killing it in a very gruesome way, but she was 100% sure it was to do with the Ouija board, because how the hell would a random black horse appear in the middle of the city in the afternoon? That is not a usual habitat for horses. Like, where'd you come from? Filling on number 7 slot is the ancient spirit. This one comes from Reddit user Tessa B4, who said her and her friend met a female spirit through their Ouija board that claimed she was 40 years old when she died. She was born in 91 BC and spoke a now dead language, so the user and her friend could only ask yes or no questions. Turns out the way she died was absolutely horrible. Her own mother poisoned her and she had no idea why. The users then asked if that was all she wanted to share with them, and it was. Guess when you've been holding on to something like that for so long, you're just good with telling anyone who's willing to listen. Now at number 6 is 10 hours. So this one was shared by Reddit user Lena Resden, who shared when they were about 14 or 15, they played with the Ouija board quite often. One night at 9 PM, she was playing with her friend and started getting some very bizarre responses. The user couldn't remember them now since the incident happened 27 years ago, but the entity did say that he was from Malaysia and that he was there to protect them. That's apparently the last thing they remembered, because they blinked and it was suddenly 7 AM. They didn't go to bed or something, they just literally lost 10 hours of their life and they have no idea what happened in that time or where that time even went. Neither of them remember. They just looked at each other and boom, 7 AM. Like, excuse me? I want those 10 hours of my life back. Coming in at number 5 is Get the Boy. This was shared by an anonymous Redditor who said their friend mentioned that they had a Ouija board, so they decided to mess with it. Big no-no, my friend. Now initially their friend said no, but then she warmed up to the idea and agreed to get it out as long as she didn't have to participate. The user set it up and asked if anyone was there and got no response. Then, trying to be a cool teenager as they all are, they said if anything is in here and not talking, you're a coward. And again, after getting no response, they just put the board away. About a week later, the user was sleeping during a thunderstorm. How very cliche, I know. They woke up midway to complete darkness and tried going back to sleep. 30 seconds later, they heard someone or something whisper "Get the boy" in a very raspy voice. Thinking it was them just hearing things, the user went back to sleep to then hear "Get the boy" much louder before hearing a door slam shut downstairs. He up and got the hell out of there because he was the only one at home at the time, so we're not trying to mess with anyone. No Ouija entity, no. At number 4 is The Evidence. Now this one was shared by Fontes on Reddit, who shared 3 images of him claiming that's what happened to him after using a homemade Ouija board. He asked the entity a bunch of questions and also asked if the spirit was the one who had scratched his chest a week prior after using the board, and the spirit replied yes, and that it was here for him and that it was not going to leave him alone. These are the images that he shared. Now okay, obviously these look really bad, but I don't even know if this is a real one or not. These scratches could have come from another accident or an animal attack, I have no clue, but we kind of just have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But then again, who would just do this for internet clout? Actually, many people would do that for internet clout, but we are gonna give him the benefit of the doubt, people. Filling our number 3 slot is Careful What You Wish For. This one really gave me the creeps, to be honest, and was shared by Back in Om Nom Nam on Reddit. They shared that about 15 years back, his sister had some friends over and they were all watching a horror movie in the basement. Already the start of a very horrific night, just by the sounds of that. The friends also had a Ouija board with them, so they of course tried it. Dramatically, they started cussing at it, calling it fake and and so forth, and then went back to watching the movie. Out of nowhere, all the lights and electricity goes out in the house, and they all start screaming their heads off, which is, an accurate response. The TV then comes back on, blaring this awful noise, and at this point the girls are hysterically crying. The TV then turns off, and when it turns back on, the display is completely black except for the words, "This is not a game anymore." I would have shot myself at that point. And at this point, everyone runs out of the house, completely forgetting their dog in there. When they finally build up the courage to come back, their dog was waiting on the front porch with the darkest eyes ever and the look of pure evil. Now at number 2 is Steve Part 1. So this one was shared by Reddit user KR Chrome. He said he was playing with a Ouija board with his friends when he was young. While they were playing, his 9-year-old bratty cousin came in asking to play, and they said no because he was too young, but that he was welcome to watch if he wanted to. He then snitched and told his mum, who then walked in, shouted at all the kids, snapped the board in half, and then stepped on the planchette. A month later, the user's aunt comes to visit again, and she is not looking good, my friend. She's super pale, has bags under her eyes, and is very nervous at everything that moves. Now the cousin couldn't come since he had fallen down the stairs and was in the hospital. The aunt then shares with the user's mum that the last month has been absolutely awful for her. She's been hearing weird noises at night. The cousin is apparently obsessed with an imaginary friend called Steve, which by the way was the same spirit the kids were talking to when they were playing with the Ouija board. See how everything's just connecting together now? Things around her house had started breaking, her drapes randomly caught on fire despite no fire source nearby, and her son was in the room the whole time and claimed Steve did it. Not believing him, the aunt grounded him and woke up the next morning with scratches all over her arms, and it doesn't even end there. She shared that she was so paranoid someone was breaking into her house every night that she even called the police, who found absolutely nothing. Paranoid with her kids still in the hospital, she moves in with the user's family for a while. Cliffhanger, on to part 2. And finally, at number 1 is Steve Part 2. So after the aunt moved in, the user and his family realized nothing was actually happening that was deemed odd. The aunt continued to see dark figures out of the corner of her eye, so nothing was going well for her. She's like the victim of this whole scenario. When her son was discharged from the hospital, she continued seeing things, and one day she saw him in the reflection of the mirror and started shouting at him for not being at school, and then his reflection just vanished. Turns out he never even left school. Child Protective Services then came to the house to see if she was fit to take care of her son, and turns out she wasn't, and so she lost custody of her child, and she was also admitted to a mental hospital. This story has so many twists and turns, I'm actually sweating, you guys. Like, this is where is this going? The user and his family would visit her regularly, and he eventually came clean and said her bad luck and deterioration was most likely because of her breaking the Ouija board, and she went off, flipping tables, screaming at the user, blaming it on him. She then went to grab a chair to attack him with it before an orderly came in and subdued her. A month later, she was found dead in the hospital because she had choked in her own room. They found a marble in her throat and weren't sure if it was accidental, whether it was self-inflicted, or whether Steve finally finished the job.